Hello, everyone. My name is James Battershill, and I'm the founder of Juno Food Labs, a Winnipeg-based food processing startup that focuses on making products that include new and innovative protein ingredients. I also sit as a member of the Winnipeg Food Council and the Manitoba Protein Consortium. On behalf of the consortium, I'm very happy to welcome Alison Cairns to speak today at the Manitoba Protein Summit about sustainably feeding a growing global population. Based in Switzerland, Alison is partnership lead for the 2021 UN Food Summit Secretariat, working to mobilize the private sector and farmers to act towards system transformation. Previously, Alison was Director of Food Systems Transformation at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, a CEO-led organization of over 200 leading businesses working together to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. She also previously worked for Unilever, where she was the Global Advocacy and Partnership Director for Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security. Alison has also worked in corporate, public policy, and campaign roles, including the head of government affairs with the Royal College of Nursing and a campaigner with Oxfam to advance the Make Trade Fair initiative. With such extensive expertise in food systems and sustainability, I'm very excited to hear Alison's take on how Manitoba can contribute to feeding our world's growing appetite for protein without depleting its resources. This session has been pre-recorded just to avoid IT hiccups. However, if you have questions, Alison is still live with us here today on the chat. So please enter them into the chat box and you will get a reply. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you very much, James. And I am absolutely delighted to be speaking to you for your Manitoba Protein Summit. And it's fantastically well timed, given where we are with the UN Food Systems Summit, to do exactly what you were saying, James. How do we able to sort of feed a growing population in a way which is sustainable and also, importantly, delivers equity as well? So what I'm going to do is share with you more about the Food Systems Summit, because I think it's important for you to know this as we look to accelerate towards delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals, and also what it means for your community, as well as Manitoba as well. So firstly, on the summit itself, the Secretary General launched this summit, and he launched it because and an engagement process as well, because he wanted to unleash the power of food systems to deliver on all 17 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And in particular, when we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, it's pretty clear that parts of the food system are working, but there is a real fragility in relation to the food system as well. And the COVID-19 pandemic shouldn't distract also from the deeper fundamental shifts that are required in the food system, given the hidden costs of the food system in relation to externalities related to health, externalities to equity, and also around the environment as well. And the view really of the Secretary General and Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who's Special Envoy of the Summit, is that we are all part of the food system and we all have the responsibility to act. And so the aim of the Food Systems Summit and its vision is to deliver a more sustainable, a more nutritious, and a more equitable food system, and really accelerate towards delivery of the SDGs by 2030, because it's clear we are not on track. And if we don't sort food systems, we will not be on track. So this is a really critical sort of window that we have to make real progress. And the work that you are doing, and in particular the protein community, have a particular role to play in helping achieve that, achieve the promises of the SDGs. Now, the goals of the summit are fourfold. One, there's a desire to dramatically increase the public discourse on food systems, because clearly that needs to happen. We also, secondly, want to deliver against a series of actions and commitments that will help us deliver these goals. But what that means is elevating what's already happening, that's going in the right direction, removing barriers to things that are stuck, and really leveraging the summit process to do that, as well as bringing forward new innovation, new commitments as also. And I'm very conscious that, you know, Manitoba has got some real innovation and new thinking when it comes to the food system that we'd be really keen to see elevated and shared as part of this process. And I will come on to talk about how we think that could happen. The third area of outcome for the summit is around a high level set of principles, if you like, based on the summit process that will help guide how we transform the food system into one that is more nutritious, more sustainable, and more equitable. The fourth outcome is a system of review and follow-up, because clearly we need to ensure that the commitments and actions, they're actually reviewed for impact, for learning, and so on. And so those are the four main outcomes that we're looking for in terms of the summit. And I talked about the summit engagement process. You know, it's really important and vital to this summit. We'll have had, by the time we get to the pre-summit, which is going to be in Rome in July, and probably hybrid, in person and digital, to be inclusive. And then the summit itself, which will be in New York, but also hybrid in September. You know, over the last year, we've been engaging in a process to really bring in as many people into this process as possible from all the different stakeholders that are important to the food system and that also need to act and contribute to this shift that we want to see. So we have been engaging with scientists, farmers in all their diversity, the private sector in all its diversity as well, civil society, again, in all its diversity, consumers. And we really want to make this a people's summit, not just an academic exercise, but a people's summit. We also want to make this an action summit and really bring forward solutions as well. So there are two main work streams that we have running at the moment. One work stream is around dialogue. There are a series of dialogues that we're doing and types of dialogue. There are global dialogues around different thematic areas. And we're also asking every country in the world to do a national dialogue, because food systems are global, but they're also national, and they're sub-national, and they're local. And these dialogues are really critical. And I would urge Manitoba to advocate to the Canadian government to hold national dialogues. The other type of dialogue is independent dialogues. And these are for everyone. I said about being a people's summit. Therefore, we want to give people the opportunity to really contribute, one, what the solutions that we need to be considering, but also what they can do to bring food system reform in place. So these independent dialogues are critical inputs to the summit as well, alongside these national dialogues, alongside the global dialogues as well. And I would encourage the protein community to hold an independent dialogue, Manitoba to hold an independent dialogue as well, and really bring your thinking, your ideas, and what you can do to the summit. The second area, which you'll be interested in relation to the summit, are the series of action tracks. And effectively, they provide some objectives for some goals for the action tracks. So the first one is around achieving no hunger, and to help everyone to have nourished and sort of healthy food, to ensure that that food is safe and accessible and affordable. The second area is building demand around sustainably produced food as well, and reducing waste in the system. At the moment, the system is really, food system is really quite wasteful. So we need to reduce food loss and waste in the system, and apply circular thinking to be able to make best use of the system that we have. The third objective is about boosting nature positive production. And that's essentially about reducing environmental impact, reducing biodiversity loss, pollution, reducing soil degradation, and also addressing greenhouse gas emissions. The fourth objective is about lifting people out of poverty. It's about enabling entrepreneurship, and it's about addressing inequity. And then the fourth area, the fourth action track, is around promoting global action around building resilience to shocks and stress. And then there are a number of different cross-cutting levers. One on innovation, which you'll find particularly interesting. One on finance, one on gender, and one on human rights. So whilst the action tracks may seem quite siloed, we're bringing them together through these synergistic levers to produce, areas of hopefully game-changing solutions that could be transformative, that we can crowd in stakeholders to help work up further to really become the commitments and actions that we would like to see. And the reality is, when thinking about the future of the food system, is what we need, and the kind of general direction for the summit discussion is, we need more of things. We need more diversity of protein. We need more nutritious food. We need more equity, and we need more positive impacts on the environment. So it's about raising the bar in many ways. It's also about raising the floor, because we also we need to look at production practices. We need to look at the environmental impacts. We need to look at labor conditions, antimicrobial resistance, waste, health, and also overconsumption as well, are all part of what is currently being dialogued in the dialogues that I was talking about, and what is being discussed in the action tracks. So what I want to really encourage you is to get engaged, and share the innovation that you clearly have, and the initiatives that you are working on, because we also want to have a very nuanced discussion about quite often difficult issues, but to really lean in to help advance them in the best possible way. And the opportunity of this UN Food Systems Summit is to do that, and to really, get us back on track to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. So what I'm urging you to do is get involved in terms of holding an independent dialogue, advocate for Canada to hold a national dialogue, and participate in the action tracks. And as game-changing solutions start to emerge, crowding in to help support and advance them as well. As I said, there's some really innovative thinking around protein that you are advancing. Please share that. It's important that it's shared in your networks and beyond, and becomes a contribution to the summit process. So once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you for this summit. And please do, I look forward to your questions, and we're very keen to hear more about what the innovations that you're working on, and the issues that are emerging, and they could be part of the discussion and dialogue of the UN Food System Summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. It's great to hear your insight just in terms of how the UN approaches having those dialogues and conversations. And I'm going to start by asking you a question on the nature of big conversations and big dialogues. Canada, as you know, is a very large country, both geographically and in terms of diversity of its population. And we at times run into issues where we are seeking out some national consensus around how to approach an issue, and having that national dialogue and those competing interests at times can be a challenge to overcome. And I can only imagine when you're doing a dialogue at an international scale that those challenges get even worse. So what steps or recommendations could you offer to us as we're having those national dialogues and even the provincial dialogues in big provinces like Manitoba, to make sure that everyone's perspective is considered and heard, and that people are feeling engaged and that there's buy-in to the solutions that are proposed, but also that there are decisive and important decisions that are made effectively?
No, thank you. I mean, the food systems are complicated. Food systems are complicated, and it would be nice to have a silver bullet, but there isn't one. And it will take time to really address some of the fundamental shifts that need to happen within, a complicated. A first step there is the multi-stakeholder dialogues, ensuring that they are multi-stakeholder, that you are getting the representative interests around the food system ecosystem involved in those dialogues is really quite critically important. And recognizing, one, it's complicated, and there are no easy answers, and there'll be many different sort of pathways to the outcome as well, that notion of diversity. So I think that the starting point, and recognizing that these dialogues aren't just one-offs. I mean, we're hoping from a UN Food System Summit, we're kicking off something that will be ongoing, and not just a one-off. But I would say multi-stakeholder, don't shy away from the complexity, don't shy away from the difficult discussion to have, lean into them. And it is an ongoing process.
That's great. Interested to know, you bring a wealth of experience to this discussion and to these processes. And I'd be interested to know your take on how these dialogues and these discussions are different now from maybe where they were 10, 20, or even 30 years ago. Is there a greater appetite for collaboration and moving forward, again, on those sustainable development goals? Or are we seeing a lot of the same challenges now that we did several decades ago?
I think it's a really good question, certainly from my experience, which has been diverse around the different constituencies of interest here. And there are a couple of things that are different. Firstly, from a business point of view, that even at my time in the corporate sector, you've noticed a difference from companies doing things in their own supply chain to address environmental impacts, for instance, to actually wanting to collaborate with their peers and then their value chain as well. There's a recognition that they can only do so much in their own supply chain. And therefore, that's a big difference. That's a big shift. They actually have to collaborate as a sector. And then beyond that, there's also recognition that you actually need, willing governments. You need government engagement in this as well to make things a new norm. So that's why I was talking about earlier, the multi-stakeholder dimension to this is really important. And that's a big change. The other change is it's not just about tackling one issue, environment or biodiversity or climate or equity or health. It's about actually tackling all of those at the same time. No constituency, whether it's a government, whether it's a company, should cherry pick issues to try and tackle. The challenges and what brings in the complexity is the need to tackle all those at the same time. And that requires a systems approach and multi-stakeholder and deeper, more fundamental collaboration than we've seen to date. But what I'm seeing is that there is a move to that. There's a move to think for private sector beyond their individual company to their broader sector ecosystem value system. There's a move from tackling individual cherry picking issues to thinking more systemically as well. And that is I think that's a mindset shift that will hopefully bring about real change.
So you talk about an increased awareness and recognition, both from governments and corporations, to tackle some of the challenges. We know that obviously climate change has been one of the most top of mind issues for both the public and private sector for many years now. And I suspect that that's probably one of the shifts in terms of areas of priority that have occurred over the last 30 years. I'm interested to know your take on the impact that climate change could potentially have on food security and food sovereignty at a global scale. And sort of specifically, I'm curious to know, do you see specific countries that are doing maybe a better job of adapting their industries to the realities of a changing climate and their food systems at large?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think those countries that are embracing the agenda around climate will become more resilient. Those that are embracing a more food systems approach will also increase their resilience to climate, because it's still pretty clear that climate is going to impact those communities that are the least, and those countries and regions that are the least able to respond effectively. And those communities that are employed, sort of rural communities that are employed in agriculture, are going to be the most exposed in the countries. So I think what I'm trying to say is the more a country can look at a more integrated sort of approach to food systems, the more resilient they will ultimately be to changes around climate, which is clearly a very sort of dominant sort of focus. But it is not just about climate. It's about, as I said, biodiversity, equity, and so on as well, as part of that agenda. Over.
Absolutely. So are there any countries that specifically are doing a really great job of addressing that food systems in a holistic way that places like Canada could potentially see some lessons that to be learned from?
I mean, I think there are a number of countries that are tackling parts of the challenge. I would say that there is a number of countries, I think including Canada, are looking at more integrated approaches to food systems, is one area. There is also countries like Colombia, countries like Costa Rica have also made some interesting sort of advances around food systems, climate, but also food systems as well, and sort of recognizing the need to if you like, go further around food systems transformation.
One area that I think is a challenge in our food system that has really been brought to light is the issue around workers and labor within it, whether it's at the farm level all the way to restaurants or grocery stores. Obviously, we talked during the pandemic about the role of these essential workers and the importance that they play. But the reality, of course, is that especially in some countries, many workers in the food system or in a vulnerable position. I'd be interested to know your take on what steps can be taken to elevate that as a priority issue in this discussion. I think a lot of attention gets paid to nutrition and the environment, and maybe less so on sort of the human impact our food system has on the people that are integral to it.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why we've got a specific action track around livelihoods and equity. We've got an action track which is looking at lifting people out of poverty, to bring in sort of entrepreneurship to address inequity. And that track is looking specifically at that challenge. Because I think you're right, one of the lessons that was learned from climate was not really addressing the people agenda, not addressing equity, and that really challenged the delivery on the promise of the Paris Climate Agreement. We've learned from that around the design of the Food Systems Summit to build in people, the people agenda, make people really at the heart of this summit, and specifically looking to address inequity, address agenda issues as well.
One of the first things that you mentioned that sort of piqued my interest is that you talked about addressing some of these issues as an effort to identify and resolve externalities sort of within our food system. And we talk obviously a lot about those externalities and how they manifest in different production systems. And I'd be interested to know your take and what your view is on what the most effective policy tools might be available to help countries address externalities, whether or not you've seen success by pricing externalities or regulatory interventions or education and support tools for industry where they may be occurring, and whether or not the type of externality, whether it's human health or environment, demands a different type of approach.
I mean, I think when you consider what a game-changing solution could be to really transform food systems, it would be able to really understand the true cost of food. To understand the true cost would really be a game changer. I think there are tools out there in terms of the carbon, measuring carbon, and therefore being able to put a price on carbon. So, I mean, that could be, I mean, that's something to really sort of push for in terms of, what we're trying to achieve at the moment. As you start moving into health and nutrition, we don't have the same kind of clarity around targets, metrics, and measurement to be able to put sort of prices on that per se. And so that's more difficult. But that's the opportunity of having, the opportunity of the summit to be able to really elevate those discussions to get to that position. So, I mean, I think there are part of that sort of addressing externalities we can do, and hopefully we'll be able to push to do that. But there are other dimensions that require the tools because they don't exist at the moment. And that's part of the summit, hopefully, is that tools will be developed. So we will identify tools to sort of bring into the summit that can be then shared as part of the output and the knowledge and products from the summit itself.
One of our protein consortium members works on the climate change file for the province, and he always says, you can't mitigate what you can't measure, referring to greenhouse gas emissions. And it sounds like it's that same approach in this situation, where if we want to actually tackle some of these problems that arise from our current systems of production, measuring is absolutely the first step if we hope to solve them at all.
No, absolutely. And this is why, as we think about the game-changing solutions that we want to come out of the summit, we need to ensure that there are targets, that we bring forward metrics and that we measure them. So that's part of the agenda that we're looking to take forward as part of this sort of dialogue process. and work of the summit.
Absolutely. Curious to know your thoughts on consumers specifically. We talk a lot about the role of government and the role of industry, but obviously at the end of the day, the people that are engaging in the food system by actually purchasing and consuming what it produces are some of the most important actors, and they're often the ones that's most difficult to get their voices to the table, just because there's obviously everyone is a consumer, and there's no real structured organization to sort of advance that voice in the way that other actors in the food system do. How do you advise either countries or organizations to engage with consumers to effectively get their feedback on what their priorities are and the role that they can play in food systems transformation?
I mean, consumers are an important, absolutely important group. In fact, we have a champions network, and we have a consumer organization on that sort of champions network. And that organization, as a global one, has about 200 consumer organizations as part of that network around the world. So that's one way that we're trying to reach out, gain the view of consumers, and sort of bring it back into this summit process. And that's why we've also got these independent dialogues that we talked about. And we also want to seek to make this summit as inclusive as possible. And we are looking at a sort of broader sort of mobilization approach. But I think these networks, the consumer organizations, are certainly an entry point into the summit, but also businesses who, like consumer companies, have a lot of data around what consumers think, what their preferences are as well. And it'd be great to be able to see some of that insight being brought into this dialogue, but also perhaps repurposed for it as well. And really hoping to build partnerships with these organizations, with advertisers and others who can really reach out into the broader sort of consumer community, if you like, to bring in their thoughts into the summit process.
That's great. Well, unfortunately, it's been a fantastic opportunity to hear from you and the work that the UN is doing on this topic and have a chance to ask some questions. Really appreciate you taking the time to present to the Manitoba Protein Summit. I wish you all the best with the work that you're doing in this space. It's so critically important, and I think that we anticipate and look forward to Manitoba continuing to engage both at a local but also at a national and international level to work on food systems transformation in a positive way.
Thank you very much, James.
Thank you.